This is a little helicopter, a mesocopter, a small robot that can fly around and keep track of things. The idea behind this, and of course it's military, it's Stanford University, it's a military-funded project, is a soldier can carry these, throw them up in the air, and actually have a bunch of them spread out and give you visuals of everything around you. This they're considering fairly low. That's what the MESI is. It's not even a micro or a mini. It's a MESI. It's a middle-sized robot. The idea is to get it down to smart dust size and be able to distribute it that way. And so Berkeley, for example, has produced a smart dust that can be combined with house paint and painted onto the walls and radio communicate from room to room what the temperature is on any of those walls. So it's a very basic sort of a thing. It's only measuring temperature in the room. But the idea here is to push towards that idea. The very small, tiny robots that swarm and gather sensor data that way. And if you go to any, including I'm sure this campus, any university campus, there's someone in the computer science department working on the protocols that allow this swarming to happen. There's no question that this is kind of the direction that people are pushing in robotics and in surveillance. Okay, so that's all I have for now. There's lots of other stuff we can talk about that's kind of related. Images in any way. And in fact, Tufte pushes on this idea a bit. He talks about how Galileo throws images in line in his discussion. So it says, and then there's Saturn. It has a little picture of Saturn so that you know what he's talking about when he's talking about Saturn. And you start to see that at an early stage this kind of division of, okay, in part because of the technologies, because you were using movable type, of print from images. And these were in books on separate pages, and in newspapers and journals in separate areas or columns, because that's the way you had to print it. Also early on, this is again pre-newspaper or pre-mechanically reproduced newspaper, the use of illumination directly by illustration. That is, people taking, on the earliest cases in the journals in London, taking each individual paper and illustrating it by hand. And so, you could reproduce the text, but if you couldn't afford to do block prints in some way, mind you, movable type came after block printing, right? You could do different kinds of printing using a printing press with block, either eventually carved, and well, the whole history there. But the images came before the movable print, but people had printing presses and didn't have the expenses, didn't have the ability in producing a newspaper to kind of do images consistently. And so in some cases they had people draw or had people highlight or do things to bring out or emphasize particular parts of the text. Doodly-doodly-doo. Yeah, we'll leave that. So we're in this weird position of a lot of what we do with newspapers is because that's the way the machine was laid out. So how's the Gutenberg Bible laid out? I don't have an image of the Gutenberg. You with computers see you have this instant magic picture. You can see a picture of a page from the Gutenberg Bible, and the number of lines is limited by the Gutenberg press. You can't, on Gutenberg's press, say, oh, well, today I think I'm going to do a 2-column layout. Because, well, I guess you could actually, but it would be hard to do because it's not really set up to do that. You certainly couldn't go from 40 lines to deciding that you want it on a page. Today we're going to do 31 lines on the page. You could, but it would be weird because you just leave the other lines blank. So the technology itself was very clearly delineating what you could and couldn't do. That's not the case anymore. Really, we could do anything we want to do with text. So why is it that we're still doing this kind of thing? And it all has to do with convention. The first journals appeared in the century after Gutenberg's press. Actually, the journals in the sense that we think of them, actually within about 10 or 15 years, people were using a Gutenberg type press in northern Italy to produce something that was like a journal, but in this kind of sense. Newspapers looked like that. In other words, one of the things that we said was that's the wrong size for a newspaper, but it went from the standard pamphlet size because that's what the printing presses could handle up to larger and larger sizes. It took about 100 years for you to start to get things like this. That is, headlines that could branch over to, first of all, multiple columns, came pretty quickly, and then headlines are different types of type. Type could be extraordinarily expensive to buy. It was more expensive than the printing press itself in many cases to buy a single set of type. And so to have not only a single set of type, but then also have another set at a different size was a serious investment. So this move to headlines took a little while. You'll notice that multiple columns developed over the next 100 years in part as a response, primitive headlines, and part of it is response to advertising, specialized classified demands. In other words, in that case, we're still using, there's a guy standing there with type, shoving it into the what? Making it into a stereotype, right? Creating a stereotype, the original use of that term. And so in order to be able to attract salt, he had to have a whole box of salt-sized type. I mean, this is one of the reasons he had it. By the late 19th century, and that's past there, but into there, news is increasingly laid out by hanging strips from the masthead. That is, you start to have what we consider the newspaper layout, which is sort of you start at the top and you have the articles run down, and it starts to look, this is a terrible picture, but it starts to look a lot more like what we think of as a newspaper. You have real headlines, and often the real headlines are not just murder of President Lincoln, but kind of a laid out headline that gets smaller and smaller, almost like a movie title, and runs through it. And you start to have lines and boxes. That was, what's the date on that? Like 1870s, right?
1855.
Okay. So lines and boxes, that one has the box and the lines, and if you look between the columns, there's lines between the columns as well, and that's true of that 1850. Is that true of your guys's? Do you have lines between your columns?
We do.
You do?
No.
So you start to get this use of technologies that allow you to kind of, why do that? Yeah, it's a technology to aid reading and aid the structure of the page. It's information architecture. It's what we're not going to talk about today. It's this idea of saying this is how I'm structuring the information on the page.
Doesn't the Wall Street Journal still look like it's on there?
Oh, yeah.
They just redid their website.
I don't know why they're doing it.
But the way they have the digitized photos and
Right.
and the different style types of headlines, just watch it like that. It'll help you find the
You mean,
before. If you go to
The last
yeah,
one?
before, yeah.
well,
Then the Wall
what's
Street
it
Journal-
missing? The Wall Street Journal not always has, but for the last 20 years, has an image right here,
Yeah.
which is its mark for it. But that Wall Street Journal looks even different than 5 years ago Wall Street Journal does. First of all, it's color, which again, I still haven't, the idea of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal being in color is still bizarre to me. But it's color. But they're also using kind of set boxes. It's funny, maybe 5 years ago, the Wall Street Journal did a special issue, which was the Wall Street Journal 312, I think it was. And it was like all stories from the year 312 AD. But in order to do that, they did it in black and white to kind of, make it feel like it was. And they used, traditional layouts. But